HannahMouse1 here. Welcome to another episode of my Scratch farming game devlog series. It's been a while since I released the demo of the game, so in this episode I'm going to make the marathon run to getting this project released. Whatever happens, there'll be a playable version of the game available by the end of this video. So let's jump straight into this. First though, I decided to do the long overdue task of tidying up all my code because it was, quite frankly, a complete mess. I spent some time just going through, finding instances of repeated chunks of code and using custom blocks to reduce the amount of times the same thing is written out. It will also help to add in new items down the line because instead of recoding it for every instance of whatever it is and adding, I can just stick some values into the custom block and the framework is already there. Not to mention it makes the game a bit more performant. I also put some labels on the more complex scripts to help me find things a bit quicker. This of course took absolutely ages and was pretty laborious, but was well worth doing and set the game on a good trajectory moving forwards. But once that's done, I created a settings tab, starting with the icon. I start with the volume slider, although it's a while before I give this any functionality. I just make it so that it sets a variable I can later use to multiply on any sounds that are being played, and the little speaker icon changes slightly to reflect the volume. I then create some other settings options that I've quite honestly been dreading implementing for a while: saving and key binding. I decided to start with key binding, partly because it's the easiest one to do and partly because it's something that should probably be saved, so doing this before programming the save function is probably a good idea. I start by creating icons for every keyboard input, and I should add that, for now, anything you use the mouse to interact with can't be changed. At some point I might add in support for keyboard only control setup or possibly mobile support, but that is something for future me to worry about. I create an icon for every button that your keyboard can register, which took some figuring out because not all of the recognized inputs show on the when button press drop down, so I basically had to test all the buttons independently. But I get that all working and make sure that anytime these keys are referenced in the script, it now takes them from the keybind list rather than calling it directly. So now if you'd rather play with arrow keys instead of W, A, S and D, you can. And then I make a small tweak to the blacksmith store that I've been wanting to make for a while. Now you can sell wood and rocks there, so there's some reason to actually collect them, or at least a way to use the excess resource you get from clearing the farm and quarry. Then of course it's time to tackle the save system. Scratch doesn't have the ability for internal saves, so I had to do the old school approach and generate a save code. I start by creating a list of every list and variable in the game that needs to be saved, and I then make it so all of these are set within the save load function at the start of the new game instead of randomly in various sprites that they loosely relate to. Mostly more complex scripts like the tile generation or generating the bulletin board requests will stay in their own sprites because moving them would be a pain and it's easy enough to keep track of anyway, but everything else I move over to the save load sprite. I then make it so that all of these variables and lists can be cycled through and saved into a single very long code. This code is then added to a list allowing for copy pasting. Then I go through and make it so that the game can ask for the code and then make it back into the variables and lists that created it. This took a lot of testing and tweaking to get working, but I managed to get there eventually. To make testing a bit easier, I added the load button to the start screen. I also create a save graphic because saving can take a while and I don't want people to think that their game has frozen while that's happening. And I make the copy code list appear when the code is done saving. I also make it so that you can't click off the save screen because interrupting the save would cause a whole bunch of issues that I just don't want to worry about. And I also create a loading bar for much the same reason. I don't want people to think that their game is frozen while the game is loading. I spend some time trying to balance the prices and monetary rewards for things to make a decent sense of progression, because in a lot of cases I set these things a bit arbitrarily and now there were so many interlocking systems it's not really working anymore. And this is something I'd love some feedback from you about because it's the sort of thing which is pretty subjective and I want it to feel as right for as many people as possible. And of course any play sessions like this are good chances for finding and correcting glitches, making tweaks and just creating a more streamlined gameplay experience. I then decided to revamp the title screen because I kind of lazily slapped it together for the demo, but it really wasn't up to scratch anymore. You might not think that a screen that the player is on for a matter of seconds really matters, but it is the first impression of the game, so I really want it to hold up. I make a whole lot of art for it and create a subtle parallax effect when you move the mouse. I had a few clouds passing in the background to really bring things to life. I absolutely love a bit of interactivity on a title screen, so I make the letters on the title lighter light up if you mouse over them, and I also include the NPCs just hanging out and they react if you click on them, which I think is super cute. And I redo the play load buttons to fit a bit better with the new style. I think the title screen looks so much better and more alive now. If anything, it might be a little bit too busy, but I am really happy with how it looks. I then just play through the game, make a few tweaks, and just make sure that nothing halts the flow of the game. For instance, the root vegetables only showed up under the plants tab, but it makes sense for them to appear under both plants and seeds to keep the momentum moving when you're planting your crops. I then decided to tackle the sound effects. To make my life easier, I decided I wanted a nice clean slate with this, so I went through and removed any pre-existing sound effects. I make it so that you can adjust the volume of the backing track with the volume slider, and then I went through the game and added sounds wherever they were needed. Where I could, I just reused sounds from my Save Santa game I made a while back, because I have all of those saved to a hard drive. I am still using one or two from the Scratch library just because it's a really good resource and I'm happy to take advantage of what I'm given. I also decided to label the tabs down the side and the locations on the map to reduce how much the player has to wonder what they're supposed to click at any given time. And I create a new research option, the ability to increase the yield of fruit trees. This is because making alcohol at the keg requires 50 fruit a pop, and because of the limited farming space, this can take a really long time to work towards. I also decided that it'd be nice to give a bigger yield for the fruit but increase the time it takes to grow, because it felt a bit like you were constantly having to run back to the trees rather than it being an occasional thing that I wanted it to be. And I improved the thumbnail to better reflect the new title screen for the game. I created a version of the player to include in this. I think that this thumbnail is a massive improvement over what it was before. Then I go through and update the instructions to make sure that the new features are covered and to make it a little bit more readable, because this was another slap together feature I made for the demo. And after that, I decide that the game is ready and hit that elusive share button. There's a link to the project down in the description below, and I'd be very grateful for any and all feedback or bug reports. And if you like this series, rest assured that there are plenty of updates in the works. Me releasing the project is not me closing the book on it. There are so many more things I want to add. But apart from that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please play the game and give me some feedback. It would be very much appreciated. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Lets me know that this is something you want to see more of, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!